Chapter 131. Shocked to hear of the Northern Kingdom's words of the king. Fan Xian was too late to explain and ordered with a smile, "I'll say it, you memorize it." He couldn't sharpen his ink in time, so he casually picked a quill pen, dipped it in some of the ink left in the inkstone, and handed it to his sister, then closed his eyes tightly and began to recall the complex distribution of the palace and the direction of the roads inside the palace. The more Fan Ruoruo wrote, the whiter her face became, and Fan Xian's face became whiter and whiter because of the memory drain, turning the brother and sister into two big white faces. It was not easy to draw the route map in the palace. Fan Ruoruo finally couldn't help but shout out in a low voice, "Brother, do you know that this is a major crime of treason?" Fan Xian relaxed, sitting on his butt in the chair, not speaking for half a day. Having spent half a day in the palace today, both talking and gossiping with those nobles, memorizing the complicated paths, and finally engaging the eldest princess mentally for a long time, it was just too draining, and he couldn't slow down his energy for a while. He was naturally familiar with the Qing laws, and knew that the palace was a building that absolutely did not allow drawings. This was to prevent people from trying to sneak into the palace to do those treacherous things. And Fan Xian needed this drawing because he had already set a plan, and in that plan, that night, it should be himself sneaking into the palace to find the key. He could have asked Lin Wanner about the paths in the palace, but that would have been too risky, and the paths that the masters of the palace walked on, and the paths that Fan Xian had planned with all his heart were again two completely different concepts. Even if the five bamboos had told him about them, things like those hideouts behind the wigwams, and the sight-blind spots in the bushes of the flowers, if you hadn't walked one of those paths yourself, you would not have been able to make a plan that you were very satisfied with. Like if he hadn't walked one of those blind spots himself, it would have been impossible to make a map that he was very satisfied with, as he did today. Fan Xian stood up, walked to the table and picked up the map drawn by his sister, and found that despite the haste, his sister's penmanship was still meticulous, so he couldn't help but happily pat his sister's head and said, "When it's done, I'll invite you to go to Yishiju to eat seafood." Fan Ruoruo got angry and snatched the map back, saying, "And things came true? What things have come true? Do you know what a big deal this is?" "No, I'm going to tell father." Fan Xian laughed bitterly, thinking that the concept of the inviolability of imperial power had really penetrated the hearts of the people, but of course, he also understood that his sister was mainly worried about her own safety and the children of the whole family. If it was known that she had drawn the map of the palace privately, I'm afraid that with the affection between the Fan family and the royal family, it would be very tragic as well. "Don't worry, I'll take a break later and immediately memorize this map and burn it. No one will know." Fan Xian smiled and comforted his sister. Fan Ruoruo anxiously had tears in her eyes. "Brother, why did you draw this diagram?" Fan Xian sighed, looked down gravely into his sister's eyes, and said word for word, "Because there's something I want in the palace." "You're going to the palace to steal it?" Fan Ruoruo wanted to scream in surprise and hurriedly covered her mouth. Fan Xian said seriously, "Not bad, but it's not stealing, because that thing, originally, is mine." Fan Ruoruo got out of her shocked mood and immediately returned to her usual calmness and intelligence, judging the truth of the matter, and lowered her slightly trembling voice and said, "Wasn't it related to Aunt Yi?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "This matter must not be hidden from you." It was a very simple few words, but it was full of the sentiment of knowing and believing between brother and sister. He then smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. What kind of person is your brother? Fist beat 7-year-old children, kick 70-year-old old man, standing on the chaotic graveyard roar, do not serve me stand out, the result is hard, no one dares to say anything, haha." Ruoruo laughed with some difficulty, feeling that her brother's joke was really not funny, still worried, but knowing that Fan Xian was a person with a pretty and gentle appearance, but in reality, his heart and soul were extraordinarily hard and icy, and he couldn't say anything about it, so he had to let him go, and he himself prayed every day at home. "I'm actually very selfish." Fan Xian looked at the sadness on her brow, and suddenly said in calm introspection, "Whenever there's something that's extremely difficult for me to bear alone, I'm willing to tell you. On the surface it's a matter of trust, But in reality, perhaps it's just a matter of wanting to find someone to share the pressure with. But always did not think, in fact, this kind of pressure for you is a kind of greater pain. At least I still have you can confide in, and you can say like who to go. For example, my mother is the matriarch of the Yi family. For example, I'm about to go to the palace to steal something. Ruo glanced at him with a slight hint of sadness, trust, and pressure. The two cancel each other out. I still rejoice that brother is not hiding anything from me. Negotiations were still going on. The work of redrawing the border was going on very hard, originally, with the support of the analyzed case file handed over by Fan Xian. The specific negotiating official in charge of the Honlu Temple of Qing was exceptionally tough, and several times they nearly forced the Beiki delegation to draw a pledge on the paperwork, but for some unknown reason, maybe it was because of something that happened in the country of Beiki, the Beiki delegation had been brazenly or even hysterically dragging their feet, and it seemed that they were trying to wait for something. This smell of conspiracy was immediately sniffed out by the experienced Honlu Temple's young secretary Xian Chi. That afternoon, after a negotiation that had gone nowhere, he held a small teapot and glanced at Fan Xian, signaling him to follow him out. Along the way, there were officials saluting the two ambassadors, and when they managed to find a quieter place, Xian Shaoqing sighed a bit tiredly and said, "Lord Fan, do you feel that anything is a bit unusual?" For this negotiation, although Fan Xian held the correct attitude of observing and learning plus gold plating, after all, he was involved from beginning to end, so he also felt that the change in attitude of the Northern Qi delegation was a bit strange. But if the other party has recently obtained what can rely on the chips, then at this time should also be put out, not to the negotiation table signs nearly roguelike drag. He thought about it and suddenly frowned. I'm afraid that Beiki is now trying to find a way to obtain certain bargaining chips in order to use them on the negotiation table. Xian Shaoqing looked at him and nodded. I think so too. So tonight I will go to the palace to meet with the saint and ask the saint to issue a decree to have the supervisory yuan assist the Honlu Temple in all directions. And without finding out exactly what the Northern Qi side is thinking, I'm really a bit uneasy. Fan Xian leaned against the railing, narrowing his eyes in deep thought, thinking to himself, what are the Northern Qi thinking of obtaining? Without reason, a flash of light came to his mind, and he thought of the spy network that the Supervisory Academy had set up in Beiki, and he thought of that Duke Yan Bingyun Yan, who had been lurking in Beiki for 4 years. Not knowing what he was thinking, Xian Shaoqing said in a harmonious voice, I entered the palace this night, but after all, there is less to gain by going out in the open. Vice Envoy Fan, at this time, you can no longer hide. Fan Xian smiled bitterly, thinking that the other party must have thought that the last dossier had been obtained with the help of his father's secret forces, but heaven knows, those forces that his father had secretly taken care of for the emperor, even he himself had never touched. However, after thinking about it, he felt that he really needed to go and ask, or at least ensure the safety of Yan Bingyun on the Northern Qi side. That night, in the middle of that hidden courtyard, Fan Xian summoned Wang Qinyan and told him about his concerns with Xian Shaoqing. Wang Qinyan's face reacted in a way that gave Fan Xian some ominous omens. It has been 8 days since the courtyard received an invitation from the crows. Wang Qinyan's frown was extremely tight. This kind of news shouldn't be known at your level. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head, but I'm not going to ask you how you know. I just want to remind the courtyard through you to pay attention to the safety of the Northern Qi side. Wang Qinyan shook his head. It's all a single line of communication. If it's broken, it's hard to renew it back. Not to mention that Mr. Yan is the chief leader of the secret spies of Northern Qi. If he is all out of order, contacting again will not help. In any case, remind him to stay safe. A hint of coldness flashed in Fan Xian's eyes. He didn't like to give up on anyone because of the country's interests, especially that Yan Bingyun, as the son of a high-ranking official, he had sacrificed a lot by sneaking around for 4 years. Nowadays, Fan Xian had long since viewed himself as a part of the country of Qing, a part of the supervisory yuan, and naturally, he had a kind of admiration for the Yan Bingyun he had never met. Fan Xian thought about another matter and calmly looked at Wang Qinian. I have a mission, but it can't go through the academy, and I was hoping to seek your help. Wang Qinian looked at his lord with some confusion. It cannot be reported to President Chen for knowledge. Fan Xian's tone was calm, but Wang Qinian could hear the chilliness mixed within. Yes. With the exit of this word, Wang Qinian knew that he had already staked his life, his family's life, all on this seemingly gentle, but actually ruthless young adult. As for the courtyard, Dean Chen just instructed himself to listen to all of Lord Fan and did not hand over anything else. That night, the unfortunate news was finally confirmed. The network of secret spies that the Qing State Supervisory Academy had structured around in northern Qi was fortunate enough to have saved the vast majority of them, but to everyone's surprise, Yin Bingyun, who was the head of the secret spies, had been captured alive by northern Qi's great inner masters at the Silk Villa in the northern Qi's upper capital. For this kind of incident, generally by the lower level to open a breakthrough, and then traced up, rarely appear this kind of capture the highest level of the spy network things. In this case, there is only one possibility, that is, within the ministry of the Qing dynasty, the top, someone in a foreign country. The news of Yin Bingyun's capture of course could not be spread. That would cause a certain blow to the reputation of Qing, but even more inconsistent with the interests of North Qi. North Qi is the need to use such a leader in exchange for the corresponding benefits, not just to combat the morale of the enemy country just. As for the Qing officialdom, the supervisory yuan for organizers Yin Ruohai Lord's eldest son, for years ago has died. No one knows. He was sent by the court to North Qi. In the past few days, everyone who knew about this matter did not sleep well. In the most secretive room of the Honglu room, Xian Shaoqing closed his eyes and handed the piece of paper in his hand to Fan Xian. Fan Xian took it and saw that it was a painting of a thin cloud traveling high above the ice field. This piece of paper was secretly handed over to Xian Shaoqing by an unassuming figure in the Northern Qi delegation during today's negotiations, and the look on that person's face almost caused Xian Shaoqing to pull out his guard's sword and slash at him. The painting has the word Bingyun hidden in it. It seems that the Northern Qi delegation has also gotten the news and is ready to make a bid.